Okay, we've learned what complex numbers are. We've learned the definition of I. Now let's talk about how we can operate with complex numbers. Meaning, how do we add, subtract, multiply, and divide complex numbers? So let's take two complex numbers and let's add them together. So say we have like 3 minus 2i and another complex number, let's do 4 plus I. We can add these two complex numbers together, and it's quite simple. All we do is we combine like components. So I take my real components, 3 and 4, and add those together. And then I take my imaginary components, negative 2i and 1i, and add those together. Negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, so that's negative I. Let's do another one. Say we have 6 plus 3i plus 4 minus 10i. If I add these together, real components, 6 plus 4 is 10. 3i plus negative 10i is negative 7i. So that's how we add complex numbers. Let's subtract them. So say I had this same one, 3 minus 2i. Now let's subtract 4 plus I. Okay, when we subtract, same thing. 3 minus 4, that's negative 1. Negative 2i minus I is negative 3i. Just remember to distribute this negative, so we have to subtract the 4 and the I. Okay, let's do this other one. 6 plus 3i minus 4 minus 10i. So let's subtract these two complex numbers. 6 minus 4 is 2. 3i minus negative 10i is 13i. Okay? Now what about multiplication? So we saw how we can add and subtract. Let's now multiply these numbers. So let's take 3 minus 2i and multiply that by 4 plus I. Now when we multiply, it's just like when we multiply two binomials. So we're going to FOIL. First, outside, inside, and last. Negative 2i times I is negative 2i squared. I can then simplify this by combining like components. 12. Now 3i minus 8i is negative 5i. Now something we have to be aware of is the definition of I squared. So remember, I squared was negative 1. So I can substitute in negative 1 for I squared. And then simplify. When you add, subtract, multiply, or divide two complex numbers, you will always get a complex number as your answer, with a real component and an imaginary component. Let's go ahead and multiply these two as another example. So 6 plus 3i times 4 minus 10i. Okay, first, outside, inside, and last. We go ahead and combine like components. Negative 60 plus 12 is negative 48i minus 30, and we remember that I squared is negative 1. It's 30. Negative times a negative is positive. And then I can combine the two real components, 24 and 30, is 54 minus 48i. Great. All right, last step, let's divide. Let's learn how to divide two complex numbers. Random space. Actually, I think I have space up here. Yeah. Okay, let's divide. So say I have 3 minus 2i divided by 4 plus I. Now this is very similar to rationalizing a denominator. In order to divide two complex numbers, we multiply by the conjugate of the second. The conjugate of 4 plus I is 4 minus I. Remember, I treat fraction bars like parentheses, so I need to FOIL the numerators. That's 12 minus 3i minus 8i plus 2i squared. And I FOIL the denominators. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times negative I, negative 4i. I times 4 is positive 4i. And I times negative I is negative I squared. Let's simplify the numerator by combining like components. Negative 3i minus 8i, that's negative 11i. And I squared is negative 1, so I substitute a negative 1 for this I squared. Over 16, negative 4i and 4i is 0. Negative I squared, negative 1. So 12 minus 2 is 10. 16 minus negative 1 is 17. And then typically we see that we go ahead and just divide each component by 17. So this is 10 seventeenths minus 11 seventeenths I. So our real component is 10 seventeenths. Our imaginary component is negative 11 seventeenths I. Let's try one more of those. Let's do negative 3i divided by 6 plus 2i. All right, to divide, we multiply by the conjugate. I distribute, so negative 3i times 6 is negative 18i. And then negative 3i times negative 2i is plus 6i squared. I FOIL down in the bottom. 6 times 6 is 36, minus 12i plus 12i. The last term's 2i times negative 2i is negative 4i squared. I squared is negative 1. So I substitute a negative 1. Down here, the middle terms cancel, that's 0. 36 minus 4 times negative 1, because I squared is negative 1. So I've got negative 6 minus 18i, we always write the real component, then the imaginary component, over 36 minus 4 times negative 1. Well, negative 4 times negative 1 is 4, so 36 plus 4 is 40. So this is negative 6/40 minus 18/40 I, which I can go ahead and simplify. 6/40, that's 3/20, so negative 3 over 20. And then 18 over 40, that's 9/20. So there we have. Okay, so that's adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing complex numbers. We just have to remember that we combine like components, and we know that I squared, we need to substitute in negative 1.